We want to change the world. Change the world. Change the world. We want to change the world. We want to change the world.
Order! I'd ask all delegates to this 1977 convention of the Ontario Federation of Labour to please come to order. We'll now continue the debate on human rights. Sister Evelyn Armstrong, United Electrical Workers, is at the mic.
Thank you, Brother Chairman. When we talk about human rights, we need to deal with the question of equal pay. I repeat, when we talk about human rights, we need to deal with the question of equal pay.
That's right.
We've been talking a long time, but I think it's time to move the struggle for equal pay from the talking stage into the action stage. When we take a look at the statistics, the multinationals reap an extra $1.5 billion a year in excess profit, based solely on the lower wage that they pay women. And it's about time in the trade union movement we stop talking and begin to take up this issue at the negotiating table. Because if the Davis government to legislate this into being, we'll wait till hell freezes over. We need to begin to get the locals into action. We need local women's committees.
Yes.
We're not going to win that fight here in this hotel. It's going to be won local by local, office by office, everywhere that we work, everywhere that women are in the trade union movement.
Absolutely.
And I think that when we set up committees so that we begin to understand the issue at the local level, then the fight for equal pay will begin to have some life breathed into it. And I also understand there's a resolution coming on the convention floor later, Resolution 135. Setting up a committee within the Ontario Federation of Labour, a women's committee that can provide a very valuable contribution in coordinating the work of women's committees at the local level, to exchange information on the question of assisting each other, to bring this fight where it properly belongs, on the picket line if necessary, down to the rank and file, so that this discrimination is stopped. So I would ask when the further resolution comes forward that you support that resolution calling for a provincial federation committee. Thank you.
Way to go!
Thank you. I'm now going to call on Brother Bill Punnett, Chair of the Resolutions Committee, to continue the report from the committee.
Thank you, Brother Pilkey. I'd like to refer delegates to page 14, paragraph 5.
Point of privilege. Excuse me, brother, but I have a question of considerable urgency. A resolution to create a women's committee has been submitted by Local 343, OPEIU, Local 6500 of the Steelworkers in Sudbury, the Sudbury and District Labour Council, and CUPE Local 79. But it's not clear what has happened to it. Many members of the Ontario Labour Movement believe that creating such a committee will help to make this federation more aware of issues that are important to women workers. Will your committee be bringing forward that resolution to the convention?
We don't need a petticoat committee.
What are you boys afraid of? Losing your pants?
Shut up and get back to the kitchen.
Out of the kitchen into the union!
Sit down before you fall down, beautiful.
You boys are afraid of a little committee, huh?
You can join in committee in my hotel room.
In your dream.
Order! Brother Punnett, please continue your report.
We'll be bringing forward all the resolutions in order of importance. We'll get to the issue of a women's committee in good time.
Now, we want it now. Yeah, now!
Excuse me, Brother Pilkey. Point of order.
Identify yourself, sister.
I'm being Kupi Local 79. Irene, there are many women delegates at this convention, and they are wondering what is happening to Resolution 135.
Give me a break.
Ladies, I told you we'll get round to it when we're good and ready.
Not before.
Get that vote.
Oh, I had such a terrible time getting daycare for this convention. Why don't conventions have daycare? I had to look for a babysitter. It took me so long. I had to go home tonight. I mean, that's one. Women with kids should have full access to these conventions. That's why we need a women's committee. Hell spells, it's 1977.
Exactly. Okay, sisters, that covers most of the issues we wanted to raise. But what are we going to do about the Women's Committee?
This is a really important issue. We have to have a foothold inside the OFL so we can press for better benefits and conditions for women workers.
Well, I'm delay bringing in the resolution. So this convention, they never even get a chance to vote on it.
Oh, we can't let that happen.
We have to fight to get that resolution on the floor. We have to insist that the resolution committee move it to the top of its priority list.
Right, okay, for the next 2 days it's warfare.
That's right.
That's why.
Good morning, delegates. Hope you had a good evening. Okay, Brother Punnett, please proceed with the report of the Resolutions Committee.
Thank you, Brother Pilkey. I can report that our committee is prepared to recommend...
Point of order. Evelyn Armstrong, UE. Brother Chairman, I rise once again to ask that we get some assurance that the resolution on creating an OFL Women's Committee will be debated. The women on this convention, held a caucus meeting last night for the first time in the history of the OFL. And we are determined to get this resolution onto the floor of this convention and adopt it.
Sister, you're out of order. You've had an answer to that question. Please take your seat.
And now your committee is ready to recommend adoption of composite resolution...
Dorothy McKinnon, QP Local 79. Brother Chairman, the women in this meeting are waiting to hear whether the resolution to establish a women's committee is going to be brought forward for discussion.
Where's the resolution?
135 now. Get those guys off the women of the OFL are still waiting, Brother Chairman. I move that Resolution 135 for the OFL to establish a women's committee be presented now.
Order! Order! Sit down, sister. We can't afford to disrupt the order of the resolutions established by the Resolutions Committee. That would create chaos.
I challenge the chair.
Yes.
We feel that as women in the trade union movement, this is a right. It's not a motherhood issue.
No, it's not.
It's a right we have in this vast organization. We want to see women sitting at meetings and participating in union business.
The chair has been challenged. All those in favor of supporting the chair, please show.
Right here, brother, right here.
Thank you. Those opposed? The chair has been upheld.
Quorum, brother, quorum. I don't think we have a quorum anymore.
Quorum has been called. Pile the doors. Let's count the delegates.
Brother Chairman, Larry Arsenal, United Steelworkers Local 8030, Toronto. Before this meeting adjourns, Brother Pilkey, I want to express my disgust with the manner in which our sisters have been treated at this convention. Our trying to put pressure on the podium to get this resolution 135, which to them is very important, onto our agenda. There were catcalls. There were catcalls and boos from our brothers in this convention, and I think that at the time, you, Brother Pilkey, in the chair, should have challenged those brothers who conducted themselves that way.
Yes.
Brother, I resent that remark.
Just a minute, Brother Chairman. I do believe I still have the floor. And the second point is I think the Resolutions Committee should have given it more consideration. They should have given this issue a lot more consideration. We can't let this resolution die.
Sisters and brothers, I rise on a point of order. Ellen Armstrong, UP. This move to close the convention is an insult to every woman on the floor of this convention. And every woman in the labor movement across Ontario.
That isn't a point of order, sister. You're making a speech.
The OFL has to step up and take a leadership role in the union movement in support of women's issues. Establishing a women's committee will help to advance the position of women at all levels of the trade union movement. In our workplace and in society, our movement needs the skills and energy of its women members. It's 1977, sisters and brothers. It's time.
Yes.
We've got a count of the delegates, and there's no longer a quorum at the meeting. The 1977 Convention of the Ontario Federation of Labour is hereby adjourned.
This is just a delaying tactic that's being used. Bureaucratic. It's about time there's a women's committee. We've got one in 279. Just wait. And sure, we need them right across.
You haven't heard the last of us. We'll be at the next OFL Executive Committee meeting to get this resolution adopted.
Cheers.
And we were, and we won. All item we did on the convention floor, the OFL Executive Committee ended up passing Resolution 135 and establishing a women's committee. It's 40 years ago, next month, April 1978, that the committee held its first meeting. And since then, it's done tons of work advancing the role of women in the Ontario labor movement.
And I think it will come as no surprise to you that although 81% of the membership of ETFO are women, they only make up 65% of the provincial executive, in spite of the fact that 5 positions are guaranteed for them. They only hold 57% of the local teacher leaderships, the local teacher presidencies, and they make up 63% of the chief negotiator jobs, which was kind of odd, but you know, local negotiations now is not what it used to be because we have a provincial framework agreement, so more women are taking those over. Now, seeing those dismal statistics, last year, Equity and Women's Services instituted a 3-year mentorship program. They asked women why they weren't going for presidencies, and they said, well, they didn't think people were encouraging them. And some said, some of those incumbents are in there for 5 or 6 years. I can't wait around that long to take a presidency. You know, they got to move on because there are no term limits. So they started a mentorship program, and it's second year of it's a 3-year dedication where they match up an inspiring leader with someone who has been a leader within the organization. And we don't have any track record on how successful that program is because it just started. But every year they'll have another 35 women participating in it and matching them up with a mentor. Now, the opposition to providing women's programs did not end with the creation of ETFO. And in fact, I hope everyone recognizes the irony here. One of the male teachers in ETFO, I think he was an occasional teacher president, took ETFO to the Human Rights Commission and charged them with discrimination because of the women's only program. And this time the Human Rights Commission came down on the right side of history, and they did say that women's only programs were protected under the code, so that he lost the case. But so you can't have your own organization, but you can have bits and pieces, and you can have a program. All of the arguments that he put forward, that women already have equality, women make up the majority. If they're not in the positions of power, it's because they don't want them. All of that is so apocryphal, because the working lives of women still are very different from those of men. Just on something like pregnancy, I know two teachers walk into the staff room and they say, oh, we're going to have a baby. And everybody claps the guy on the back, takes him out for a beer, high fives him. The board thinks this guy's really responsible. The woman who's going to be, now everyone says, oh yeah, congratulations, but they're thinking, who's going to collect the pizza money on pizza day? I wonder if her classroom is going to be free. I'd really like her classroom, but I don't want her kids. So, and the board, the principal thinks, oh boy, okay, well, I'm going to have to get an occasional teacher in here, and there's going to be disruption. So, there's still attitudinal differences because of, biological reasons that are not going to change. So all of those, as I said, were really apocryphal reasons because there's still a ways to go. Now, ETFO also does a lot of things in the equity and social justice initiatives, and I just want to read something to you because it kind of makes me cry every time I read this. But it is the ETFO it's part of the ETFO statement on social justice and equity. ETFO is a union whose members in their work with children in schools can perpetuate the current organization of society, or can, by education and example, foster a positive social transformation. We choose to support each other in learning to change the beliefs, behaviors, and systems that damage all of us by excluding and harming some of us. So, them's nice words, right? But ETFO actually is, or the people who are working in equity and women's services are actually putting that in place, and they have amazing curriculum documents to help teachers sort through discussions in the school about inclusion and exclusion and homophobia and transgender issues and Islamophobia. And they've created a unit for welcoming refugee children into the schools, and they've even got a little thing on how to create a gender-neutral bathroom in your elementary school. So they are. I mean, I'm really proud of a lot of the work that they do in the general social justice area. We also instituted a policy, well, not a policy, but it's a process for self-identification where members can self-identify as FNMI, which is First Nations, Métis, Inuit, disabled, racialized, or LGBTQ. Now, that is voluntary, but we track their participation. We ask if they're going to any of the conferences, we ask them to self-identify if they choose to. So we track the participation rates of all of these members in the organization. So ETFO's first year, when we moved into ETFO, it was a very turbulent year, both inside and out. I mean, we were dealing with new board structures, a new bargaining regime, and I will admit that the two staffs of the two unions did not exactly hold hands and sing Kumbaya. There was a lot of tension in that, but luckily I think we kept it from the membership. I think the members, were well served. And ETFO did a lot of work with the new funding formula because obviously, remember the Titanic here, the new funding formula really hit women teachers, because of the cutbacks in the primary grades. There were severe cutbacks, class sizes were going up in primary, and support services were going down. They also did some work with the funding formula with the government, and we actually wrote a book called Out of Focus, which pointed out how the new funding formula was treating young children so badly. And the new formula also worked against part-time teachers. Part-time teachers were going to have to work twice as long to be able to get to the maximum of the grid, and of course they were all women. Now, ETFO was the only organization, in spite of the fact that the other organizations had women, to bring this to the attention of the government, and we actually had a quiet conversation with the Deputy Minister in Treasury, and then threatened them with a charter challenge because they were discriminating against women. And that was actually changed due to ETFO's work. That was changed before it ever took effect. Because it wasn't that expensive, but so one of the things about ETFO was that it was sort of doing female-friendly things without actually calling them. They weren't calling them feminist issues, but they were actually doing the right thing, and they were helping the majority of the members. And with the new bargaining regime, where there was provincial bargaining on some of the monetary items, they took preparation time to the provincial framework, and we were both around for that, and they managed to get, made great strides in preparation time, which once again was going to help women because it almost automatically goes to grade 7-8 teachers who are male, but it was a great benefit to teachers in the primary. So, is ETFO the same as FW? No, it's not. Is it female-friendly? It is, even though maybe it doesn't mean to be. But we still have a long way to go to get the numbers up in representation in the positions of power. So one of the things I always think about is, what would the founding mothers of FW think about ETFO today? And it just happens that next month is the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Federation of Women Teachers, April the 3rd. Those women got together at U of T and started the organization. So next month is the 100th anniversary. So you sort of think, what do these women who look like little Valentines, from 1918, I think if they looked at the organization now, they'd be flabbergasted, because they never would have believed that teachers could have made the strides that they did in negotiations and in quality of education and in rights. So I think, they would be very proud of FW, and I think they'd be pretty proud of the work of ETFO too. I know I am in many respects. And, sort of, by the same token, though, I think they'd give you the same advice that almost any woman who's been involved in the labor movement and been involved in negotiations, that would be, a right won is never a right guaranteed, for sure. We certainly saw that. Examine every issue through the lens of how it affects a woman and the working life of a woman, and then examine it again. There are no sacred clauses for the life of a working woman. Attitudes toward men and women at work need a lot of improvement, and I think while they would say enjoy your achievements, never ever drop your vigilance, and I think that's an important message. So.
My name is Joan Roberts, and I'm the author of a book called Cracked: How Telephone Operators Took on Canada's Largest Corporation and Won. And I'm here to talk to you tonight a little bit about the occupation of telephone operators and their history of trying to unionize until they finally did in the late 70s, the same time period that the play was about, that elementary teachers were organizing and nurses were organizing. And so the time period in a few minutes I'll focus on is 1978 to 1981. At 17, I got a job at Bell Canada. And it was well paid enough that I got to leave home at 18. And then after my third year, I sat down beside this fellow operator named George Larder, and he convinced me not to go back to school, but to join a union organizing campaign. He says, you shouldn't be studying history, you should make it. So I did that. 20, 30 years later, I asked why hadn't someone written a book on it, because it was a fascinating story. And everybody said, well, I guess you have to. I said, oh, well, I'd written a couple books by then, so I knew I could write a book and get it published, so I did that. So that book, Cracked, came out in 2015. I am also right now working with Pat McDermott, who is the author of the Eden Strike play, trying to dramatize this story as well. And we know we've got some people here that might be interested in acting if we ever get it finished. So the play starts off with this fellow. We've named him Joey. And this is 1879. 1876, the telephone was invented. 3 years later, these switchboards were being placed in telegraph offices around North America. And they were cross-training telegraph operators, messengers, to become telephone operators. And I didn't have this picture when I wrote the book, it just came online. So this fellow would take the call, take the telegram, and then deliver the telegram. He got a little exasperated with this. He would also have to fix the technology. And you know, was shorting out and all these things. So he would swear at the customers a lot. And the customers got mad, the managers got mad, said, hey, we got to bring in the ladies. They'll be kinder to the customers. So that by 1900, there were no male operators left. So this is the telephone switchboard around 1900. And this is really early. But notice the two people sitting at that very slim table. That's management, right? So they got like 3 operators and 2 managers. One is the supervisor, one is the chief operator. And pretty soon, that little table was set up to be the listening board, where they would plug in a cord and listen to the phone calls for quality assurance purposes. You've heard that phrase, I think. So you may have heard about the 1907 strike. I believe somebody gave a presentation earlier about this strike. 600 telephone operators in a building on Temperance Street in Toronto decided they'd had enough when the company reduced their working hours, or they actually increased their working hours from 5 to 8 and didn't pay them anymore, and created split shifts in the process. So 600 women walked out of that building and created a problem for Mackenzie King, who was the Minister of Labour. He convinced them that he would hold a royal commission and figure out some strategies to deal with their problems. And they had a lot more problems than just the wage, because some of them were going deaf, some of them were being electrocuted from the switchboards. They had lots of problems. They went, Mackenzie King convinced them to go back to work. They went back to work. 3 days later, they passed a motion to join IBEW. And nothing came of it, because the men didn't want them in the union anyways. They would say they should go back to the house and work in the home and in the kitchen. So, but later on, we did have this history, and it was something to build on when we started to organize. Oh. So that picture before went by really fast, was a telephone operator around 1907. By 1908, 1909, telephone operators in the United States were starting to organize into IBEW. In fact, some of these locals in the States were so big that they were the biggest units in their union. There were like 2,500 people in a bargaining unit. The Local 80 was the first all-women's local union in Cleveland, Ohio. Operators from Boston joined IBEW in 1912, and that's the one that had 2,500 members. So no longer, they said, would female members be considered second class. So here, this picture is of telephone operators in St. Louis on strike. And that was around 1912, something like that. 1918, telephone operators in Toronto and Bell Telephone had the opportunity to mobilize again. Again, they held a meeting on August the 10th and decided to form a local of IBW. They demanded a wage increase of $3 per week. A few days later, Bell granted them the wage increase, but refused to recognize the union. The union local did negotiate a first contract, but it had no duration clause. A year later, that local disintegrated, and the company began to institute employee representation plans. This was a pseudo-company union structure. It had no fees for the folks, the operators. The company picked up the operating expenses, and monthly meetings were held to resolve issues between management and employees. And for close to a century after, Bell always managed to co-opt the efforts to unionize and keep these female workers in a paternalistic framework. So time went by, just as with teachers, you know, they went in and out of the labor market. The 30s, the telephone system shrank, but during the Second World War, it expanded again. And here we find Mackenzie King again. Now he's Prime Minister, and he brings in the Wartime Labor Relations Act. And it recognized the existence of unions and forced companies to negotiate with organized workers. So there was a little organizing going on, but really in the context of the war, 1945, nobody was really thinking too hard about what kind of union representation they wanted. They were devoted to winning the war, as everybody was. So there was a particular woman doing some organizing, and her name was Mary Lennox, and she was the daughter of a secretary-treasurer of a Boilermakers Union local in Toronto. And so she said she's got like real union bona fides, and she thought that, you know, we should, I say we, so I'm starting to say we a lot, that telephone operators should buy into the company as goodness, they're going to look after them. So she became president of this new company organization, company-run association, that they were calling a union, but still was a company association. And that was the Telephone Employees Association. They chose to remain only women. They did not want to be around the guys at that point. And they emphasized traditional female values and expectations. Maybe you can see the logo on this newsletter. Their logo was Voice of the Voice with a Smile. You could see emotional labor was expected to be part of the job, you know. The operators weren't even seen, but they had to be smiling. And just before I got there, maybe there was still somebody there. I joined Bell in 73, I think it was. I was a child bride. So I was a child employee too. If you're thinking why we're so young, that's a joke. So around this time, when I started, I joined dining service though. So I worked in the cafeteria for 3 or 4 years. And, but at that point, the telephone operators still had a matron. So if they had a date after work, they could go in and they could ask matron to iron their dress and look after their clothes so they could leave and go on their date. So they had cafeterias, right? And I started to work in one, and it was subsidized food, and these were all the things that companies did in those days to stymie unionization. And if you notice in this newsletter, I don't think you can read it, but number 3, we encourage you to buy Bell stock as this is the time to sign up, only once a year. If you feel you don't have 2%, which is about $4 a pay period, you are wasting the $1 the company gives you for each $3 you get. So this was their most important advice to their members: buy company stock. And as ETFO, or the Federation of Women Teachers, was, this union was really good with their money too. They had it invested in all kinds of different places and stocks, but they never went on strike, and they didn't do much. They hardly did anything compared to the Federation of Women's Teachers for real women's issues. They didn't. It was all about paternalism. It wasn't about moving women forward. That last picture was a switchboard, and by the time I left the cafeteria in 76, I think it was, that's the kind of switchboard I got trained on in long distance. So they were the same switchboards. I sat on chairs like that and that. So this was a great comic. You can read it. And so World War II came to an end. My grandmother left her job in the defense plant and went to work for the telephone company. We need to study the lives of great women like my grandmother. Talk to your own grandmother today. Ask her questions. You'll find she knows more than peanut butter cookies. Thank you. So I don't know when that came out. But this slide is from 1974, and these were the issues that Mary Lennox and the Telephone Employees Association would go to town about. They made a big deal about women needed taxis when they were coming off their shift, after midnight or before 7. Now, this got even into the Toronto Star, and she got all this publicity, but hardly any shifts ever ended after midnight or before 7 a.m. That's how the company got around it. But they wanted some publicity and to show their members they were doing something. So this is what they made issues about. But behind the scenes in the 1970s, women telephone operators are getting really militant. And every time they had negotiations, there were walkouts. One of the buildings I worked in was Dufferin Street. And if you go over to Dufferin and Bloor, and just north of the subway stop is a Bell building. So they had this big switchboard in there, just like that one, and I worked there for a while. And those women were militant as hell. So before they ever heard what the contract proposal was from the company, they were out on the street. And once real unionization came along, they were at the forefront. And unionization had to come along because technological change was there. In 1977, the company informed its telephone operators used to working on the switchboard shoulder to shoulder that they were now going to be working on computer terminals. And sociologically, it doesn't look like they can talk to their sisters anymore. They're really isolated. That listening board is now from 1900, is internalized into the computer. The computer was going to be able to not only measure how long they took to answer a call, but how many keystrokes they took to answer that call. So I never worked on a computerized system, but I only had, as an operator working on the old switchboard, 10 or 15 seconds to answer a call. So we were getting down to, a couple seconds per call here. And so, people were petrified about this new system. The company tried to buy them off with this new chair. Saying, we're going to buy you new chairs. And really, that was the number one health and safety concern, chairs. Because I still have lifelong back issues from sitting on those chairs. So, 1987 to 1988, Operators in Montreal were ready to leave this Telephone Employees Association, now called the Communications Union of Canada. The craft and services units in Bell Canada had already migrated to that union. They chose it. They thought it was a democratic union. It was a small democratic union on the prairies. Once they joined in 1974, it became a large national union, and that union wanted to broaden its base, wanted telephone operators, and operators in Quebec were quite happy to join, and they were putting pressure on operators in Toronto to do the same. Outside of Toronto, there wasn't a lot of capacity at that moment. Here are three of the organizers, or actually four, if some of you might recognize them. Irene Anderson, George Larder, Ann Newman, Connie Graham. They're sitting in, I think it's Asquith Avenue. This is Ann Newman and McCall in front of 393 University, the regional head office. So once the campaign started, the beginning of June in I said 87. That's wrong. It was 78 to 81. So I've got it all mixed up. So it was 78 to 1981. Sorry about that. So in 1978, when the campaign started at the beginning of June, the company union was called the Communication Workers Company. There was a no strike policy. The union stewards at the time, they had some other different name for them. They never got stewards training. Nobody filed grievances. People wanted more. Despite earlier attempts at unionization, this attempt at unionization was supported by the labor movement. This was an article written in the OFL bulletin or newsletter, and it urged union members to support the organizing campaign into the communication workers. How was organizing different with women than men? One of the major differences, I would say, is the socialization. Women want to socialize. They had coffee parties to organize, events. This is a solidarity party with the craft guys in CWC at the Masonic Temple. So this is just a flyer for bargaining. Why telephone operators really wanted to go into this legitimate trade union was for the democratic processes. So here, that previous flyer was organizing an election for bargaining reps before they'd ever won certification. So all the time we were organizing or going on strike, the union was having formal processes to build up the infrastructure of a legitimate union. Okay, so the first campaign ended 3 months later at the end of September 78. We thought we had enough cards for the Canada Labour Relations Board to call a vote, but when the CLRB brought down its decision on February 23rd, 1979, the CLRB denied the CWC application for certification to represent the operators because they had failed to get membership cards signed by a majority of the employees. The union was short by 143 cards when compared to the list provided by the company. We always suspected funny stuff on behalf of the company, but after getting over the shock, decided to launch another campaign that would run over the month of March. So that was 1 week later. This flyer, this next one, oh no, somewhere along the line. So after this 1-month campaign in March of 1979, the CWC announced 3,750 cards had been signed in 1 month, enough of a majority to convince the CLRB to allow a vote. There's lots of other stuff that was happening behind the, around that time, but you've got to read my book to get all the details. So here, the next one, this is in the dailies announcing that the CWC had won certification. And no, after we won the cards, July 31st, oh no, sorry, even before that, I'm trying to skip some things here. We had a second campaign, and then we had a vote campaign. So there were 3 campaigns in a row, and that's why I'm all tired out. I'm still tired from 3 campaigns. I can't keep them straight. So July 31st, 1979, the CWC was finally certified as our bargaining agent. And we had to get bargaining reps, etc. And, but by Christmas, we were on strike again. We were on strike. And then we had walkouts going on back and forth. And this is a picket sign that Irene Anderson made. I couldn't use it in the book because it was using Lucy, and that would be copyright infringement. This is Asquith Avenue, 15 Asquith, across from the library. I worked in that building too. And this was Family Day. Before Family Day was ever a holiday, we had a Family Day picket. And that's, we're all out there again. Now, I, during the strike, was chief steward at 50 Eglinton. And this was the armpit of all the offices in Toronto, because this is where the old CUC chief stewards worked. They worked in directory assistants. We hardly any cards there in the first campaign. I think I went in there in before the second campaign and started organizing. So it was Scab City. It was really hard and with all the scabs, and we had violence on picket lines. And right before I submitted the book for publication, I found this picture. I don't think I took it, but somebody did. And we would have these picket line fracases up on Eglinton Avenue, and this is behind 50 Eglinton, right at Yonge and Eglinton. And because of all the scabbing going on, all these women, you know, one woman walked by me one cold 7 o'clock morning, and she had a fur coat. She came out of a taxi because the company was paying for taxis. And I just happened to have a couple of eggs on me. And, well, that coat needed an egg shampoo. So, so one day, maybe the same day, I don't know what this day was, but we had Toronto's Finest. And this is when I really got a lesson in how Toronto's Finest treated women on the picket line, because they grabbed us on our breasts and dragged us away and threw us on the ground. So it was for women, and some of the women, I was at this point 22, 23. There were women 60 years old walking on that picket line. And when this happened to them, they were traumatized. They'd grown up, you know, thinking they were, you know, middle-class women, and they were delicate, supposedly, and everything. But they got radicalized when they were on strike. But how the Toronto police treated them was shocking. And so I always believe when I hear stories about how women have been treated by the police, because that was my trial by fire. This is Bell propaganda, putting articles in the paper, you know, that wasn't true, but this is, they were losing the PR campaign at that point. Again, the men in the craft services, they had spent much of their union dues on the 3 organizing campaigns. They were paying, and then when we were on strike, they had to give an hour's pay every 2 weeks to contribute to our strike fund, and they did it. On March 1st, this is us. Were you there, Holly? Yeah, because OWW supported us. And that's Janice McClellan, who became president of the Local 50, who I saw just a couple days ago. She's on the bullhorn, and those are some of our picket signs. That's Ed Seymour. That was a great help in writing the book. And the International Women's Day Committee. I think this was, for a while here, I thought this was International Women's Day, but it's not. I think it's at the Manulife Center in this Solidarity Picket. And can anybody see who this guy is on the bullhorn? Good done? Okay. Who said it? Yes, it's Cliff Pilkey, the guy you saw earlier. By that time, he was a big supporter. You women had really changed his tune. And International Women's Day, we were the what do you call it? We were at the front of the line anyways. I was at the front of the line because my colleagues, other operators and stuff, they were really scared to be on the IWD march. Because many of them did not consider themselves feminists at this point. But 2 years later, they were out there fighting for abortion rights and things. All of them were feminists by that time. So this is the end, the strike. So, this is what they achieved. Of course, wages and benefits, tech change, higher pension benefits. In 1982, after CUP W had instituted a maternity leave policy, the communication workers got a 75% top up to unemployment insurance maternity benefits. And then they received in 2005 a $100 million pay equity settlement that they spent 15, 20 years on. But they got it. Okay, I'm going to skip that. I just want to say that even in the writing of my book, that I had local union support, and all these unions supported me. And I used to be a Labor Council endorsed city councillor, and I must say that IBEW has been one of my biggest supporters, and even though they rejected telephone operators 100 years ago, they really came through for me. Okay. Okay, so that's it. Thank you.